So we just talked about the Cowboys playoff hopes and the Seahawks playoff hopes, and it seems like they've gone in different directions here. The Cowboys improved, and the Seahawks just got a little bit worse after this pretty good Thursday night football game by scoring. No punts in this game, actually. And the Cowboys end up with a win 41-35.
Yeah, in good old Cowboy fashion, this was a good old fashioned shootout. No punts, no tomfoolery. They just went at each other, tried to score at every chance they got. Didn't work out in the end for the Seahawks. They came up short a few times. Came up short early as well. We'll get to that. But the Cowboys, for the most part, held on, stayed resilient, and won the shootout. I guess if you take a Cowboy and a Seahawk and put them in a gunfight, I would probably take the Cowboy. So that's what we got here. Dak Prescott had a great game. 29 for 41, 299 yards, 3 touchdowns, no picks, rushed for 23 yards as well. Just a solid game from him all around. Not much more you could ask for on that one. Didn't turn the ball over. That's one of the big things Terrence and I say. If Dak can get it going and keep it out of the other team's hands, you're in a pretty good position. And that's what he did. Tony Pollard led on the ground, no shock there, 68 yards and a touchdown. CeeDee Lamb was second in rushing, though, with 30 rushing yards, and maybe no shock on this one. He led the team in the air as well. 30 rushing yards for him was a little crazy, but he leads in the air with 116 yards and a touchdown. Jake Ferguson with 77 yards and a touchdown, as well as Brandon Cooks, who got 45 yards and a touchdown. Had some pretty great games. They came up when they were needed. Kind of, I guess, natural when in a shootout. Every score is going to be he showed up when you needed him to, because the league keeps changing. But Jake Ferguson gets the walk-off touchdown. I wouldn't call it walk-off. And a few more things that happened after that. But essentially, a game-sealing touchdown that allows the Cowboys to put the Seahawks in panic mode. Deron Bland does pick off Geno Smith, but as good as Deron Bland has been this month and this season, we are not going to pretend that he had a great game last night. He did get a pick on Geno early in the third quarter, which is impactful, does great things for his team. However, it could be the amount that he got cooked by DK Metcalf last night was bad, and almost single-handedly kept the Seahawks alive throughout the night. So I don't want to hate on Deron Bland too much. He's had a really great season so far. He's been racking up pick sixes. Got another pick for himself again last night. We talked about this some with Trayvon Diggs before. We were like, interception machine, but it's also, aside from the occasional pick, allowing people to go all over the place. That hasn't really been the case for Bland until last night when it was rough. It was a bad one. Amazon Prime pulled up a graphic for him. Don't think it was that serious. Didn't have to cook him that much, but does come up and get a pick on Geno. We'll talk more about his costly coverage when we get into what the Seahawks are doing. Seahawks, Geno Smith goes 23 for 41, 334 yards, 3 touchdowns. He does have that one pick. Rushes just for 6 yards, but does get himself a touchdown. It's a pretty good game from him. We had 2, I'd say, really good performances on the QB side of the ball here. Both are fun to watch. Zach Charbonnet led the team on the ground with 60 yards and a touchdown. DK Metcalf put the Cowboys through a lot of pain, getting 134 yards on 6 receptions. It was quite the performance for him. A lot of that was against Deron Bland, and he would pick up 3 touchdowns in those 6 receptions on all those yards. Jackson Smith and Jigba was second in the air with 62 yards, but DK Metcalf was the one that got all 3 of Geno's touchdowns. Now there was like back-to-back plays, and JSN got a touchdown, but then they really didn't have control of it, so they did something else. Then he threw a touchdown to a tight end, I think, or fullback, and then they ruled that something happened, and that didn't count, and it just became inevitable. It ended up being a touchdown anyway, and it went to DK Metcalf. So some players here that could have popped up in the scoring chart, but just missed it because of some unfortunate events. Jason Myers' unfortunate event does miss a field goal early in the first half, which would maybe have some implications as they get to a close game down the stretch where they're needing a field goal to force overtime. It could be that you need a field goal to win the game. Doesn't really change how you're fighting, but it does, put a little bit of a different pressure because at least if you stall out, you don't lose. Or if you turn the ball over, you could lock in, and there's a little. You're already looking at overtime instead of looking at a loss, which is what happened to them. And that's kind of what happened. They just couldn't hold up down the stretch. Came up short on some of those last drives. Three back-to-back drives. They turned it over on downs. Doing anything they could to try to get in and put that game to bed, but just couldn't get through. The referees, we will have to mention here, had a crazy stat line. I'm not going to say that it was against one team or the other because they made sure that both teams got penalized for everything. 10 penalties on the Seahawks for a total of 130 penalty yards, and then 9 penalties on the Cowboys for a total of 127 penalty yards. They kept it even. They were hating on them both. I don't know if they really affected the game much, other than like when you're watching the game, you're like, man, there's a flag on every play. Like you could feel that one. But a good game, a good primetime game. I enjoyed it all the way through. And the Cowboys stayed resilient, beat a tough team, 41-35.
I would say it did affect the game because I mean, think about that touchdown drive with the Seahawks. They had to score 3 times to actually get a touchdown. It was
That's true.
little insane there. Because you had that play that was deep to Jackson, Smith, and Jigba that got overturned. But then it was a pass interference anyway. So get another shot. They threw it again. Penalty. Okay, let's try this one more time. Once again, threw it. Now you finally get a touchdown in the closing seconds of the quarter. And there was actually a penalty on that play too. It just didn't matter because it was on the Cowboys. So yeah, it definitely, 3 times just to get a touchdown. The fact that they scored each time was hilarious too. The Cowboys defense not necessarily having the best night there, even with Jackson Smith and Jigba not getting that all the way in. If he had, it would have been a touchdown. So the rest were very obvious. I mean, Al Michaels alluded to it at one point, just like, hey, this is a little ridiculous. And it was. I mean, it seemed like they decided to throw a flag just for like literally everything. I mean, 257 yards of penalties is ridiculous. And that wasn't the entire game, but it was definitely a huge part of it. And we can't act like like the final result probably not, but it definitely had an effect on it. Throughout the game. That pass interference where they flagged the guy for pretty much grabbing CD. Like maybe you can argue it was a penalty because grabbing him is impeding him, but it really looked more like he just put the hand on him. But either way, this was definitely a pretty good game. We didn't talk about this game beforehand, but I definitely would have picked the Cowboys going into it. And I based off of what the Seahawks did, the past few weeks, I didn't really think it was going to be that big of a, game or anything like that. I wasn't expecting the Seahawks to come out the way they did, but they came out, they put it on, and they were leading at halftime by what 1 point, so 21-20.
Yeah.
After a pretty good half from the Cowboys for the most part, just again that last drive, they allowed 3 touchdowns on one drive. So obviously the defense was having a little bit of an issue there, but every single drive that the Cowboys had in the first half, they were successful scoring, whether they got a touchdown or a field goal. So really good offensive performance in the first half. And I think a lot of, what people are talking about at that first half was definitely Deron Bland. He broke the record, or he tied the record, he broke the record, can't remember. But he got the record at least for number of pick sixes in the season. So he did that on Thanksgiving against Washington. Really impressive there. But I don't think it was like the end of the world, that he was getting beat up like that, because he was getting abused. But let's be honest, especially by DK Metcalf. I mean, they got the matchup that they wanted, obviously, because it was just every single time they got him matched up, DK went deep and was able to get things going. I mean, 6 catches, 134 yards, 3 touchdowns. I mean, he had great game. Not every single one was on Deron, but he didn't have the best first half. Deron was able to come back though. He got an interception, and I feel like that's kind of when things turn, because Seattle at that point was still up 28-27, and even though the Cowboys that next drive they got turnover on downs because they went to CD, couldn't come up with it, and Seahawks got it back and scored a touchdown. I felt like at that point that's where things kind of shifted a little bit, because after that Seahawks only scored 1 time, whereas Dallas went from having 27 to 41. So I think that's probably the moment where things changed. Because if the Seahawks had gone down and scored again, they would have already been up 34 before the Cowboys had another opportunity to score. So I think, just and emotionally too, I think that probably, charged them up, even though they didn't do anything on the next drive. I think that kind of got them going. So uh, Seahawks, the issue for them in this one is they kind of veered away from what they were doing earlier on. Obviously, you can't just abuse Deron Bland the entire game because he just got that pick, like I said. But I think they could have kept with a little bit more of the game plan. And the biggest issue, aside from the missed field goal in the first half, after having a penalty delay a game when Pete Carroll was trying to get timeout, then you miss it. Going for it, 3 straight drives, you go for it on fourth down, you don't get it. The last two, obviously, a little bit more understandable based off the time and the fact that they were down. The first time around, though, they were up 35-30, and you were at around midfield. So I don't like the call there. Like, I understand it's a 4th and 1. Charbonnet had been having a pretty good game, but that's not really the point there. I think they should have just kicked it deep. Um, you pin Dallas back, and if they score a touchdown, fine, but you're gonna make them go the entire length of the field to score that touchdown, rather than having to basically just get from midfield to the end zone. And they literally got within the 30-yard line of Seattle within 2 plays. So again, I think the last two were obvious. They should have done it because of time, and they were down. But I think the interception and them going for it right there, that's pretty much what killed them. And not being able to block, of course, Micah Parsons. We've seen that play all over Twitter this morning. But yeah, it's a really good win for Dallas. Seattle 6-6 now, but before they were 6-5, so they beat a winning team. Seattle definitely a frustrating game because now you could have been in a better spot. You're still in the playoffs right now, but now with the Rams and Packers on your heels, things are a little bit more dicey.
Yeah, it's a frustrating game with frustrating results. You end up 6-6 here. You could have been 7-5, put a little bit of gap between you and the Packers and the Rams. And at that point, you didn't put a gap between you and the Vikings, as they sit at 6-6 or 6-5, and they're hitting their bye week here. So 6-6, I would assume then. So you put yourself in a much better position. Instead, you end up losing here, and it's in a frustrating way. I remember while I was watching the game last night. We get to that first one where they go for it and they're up 35-30. I'm thinking, I don't know, man. You haven't had the best drive so far yet. You've been kind of creeping up the field. You're up 5. I just punt this one and make them fight for it. Instead, they let them walk just 54 yards. They get it in, score a touchdown, and then go for 2 and get that as well, and put the Seahawks in a pretty risky position. With that having to go for 2 as well, you can look back at the pick. That's a missed opportunity where you if you're lucky that the Cowboys turn it over on the next drive, but you're up 1-1 and could have extended it further there. You look at the missed field goal, that changes things. If you have an extra 3 points there, and then if they go for 2 and get it, it's 38-38. Now if the game goes the rest of the way it did, you still lose by 3 because they're going to get that other field goal. You turn it over on downs. As Terrence said, the next 2 times they turned it over, it was no big deal. I think you have to go for it on those. But the first one was rough. I think Seahawks made a blunder there, especially because at that point in this game, the Cowboys defense had already been kind of locking in. All right, I might have seemed that way, right? Because you score, then you threw a pick, and then you had a touchdown again, so you think you probably got your groove back, but it wasn't quite working on that drive. And you can really see that as the catalyst here. Going for it there just doesn't end up working out too well, and they crumble. And well, I wouldn't say crumble, they didn't lose that badly, but they do kind of run out of gas, and the Cowboys take it over from there. And now they're 9-3, Seahawks 6-6. Good game, fun one. Seahawks definitely got more to think about going forward here than the Cowboys do, but this was a good game. I'm sure the Seahawks will wish they got the win here, but I like what I saw playing against this tough Cowboys defense, except for towards the end of the game, as we noted. But yeah, there's positives in this game for the Seahawks as far as looking at a playoff outlook and looking at being able to clinch a playoff spot. I think there's a lot going there for that team. They just had some rough losses this season. That could end up being their kryptonite. They could lose a few too many close ones and miss out, but I think that they'll be able to take what they learned from this one the most and be able to salvage the 6 or 7 seed.